In 1867, Russia sold Alaska to the United States for $7.2 million. Seemed like a bargain. America saw a lot of potential in Alaska and was only too happy to snap it up. Little known fact is that prior to selling Alaska to the US, Russia initially offered the territory to Liechtenstein. Yes, Liechtenstein. That tiny country wedged between Switzerland and Austria. Liechtenstein was hardly an economic or military heavyweight and only had vague alliances with Germany and Austria. Why then would Russia have considered selling such a huge expanse of land with a wealth of natural resources to a European minnow? The answer most likely lies in the turbulent series of events Russia was involved in throughout the 19th century. But before that, we gotta backtrack to 1784, when Russia initially decided to colonize Alaska. The lure of a healthy fur supply plus the opportunity to expand the empire was reason enough for Russia to look towards a colony in North America. The fur trade accounted for around 10% of Russia's wealth, but supplies in Siberia were dwindling. Alaska not only had untapped reserves of fur, but it presented an opening for Russia to then set up colonies further south down the American coast. Unfortunately, the Russian colonists struggled right from the get-go. The living conditions were incredibly harsh, even for Russians. It rained constantly, temperatures were freezing, and food supplies were hard to come by. The settlers were relying on food shipments from Siberia, which could take months. As a result, by the early 19th century, many colonists were bordering on starvation. By the mid-1800s, many of the Russian colonists had either headed back home or moved south into Canada or the United States. Added to this was the rapidly diminishing stock of sea otters, which were a major source of fur. Access to fur was the major reason for Russia acquiring Alaska, but the dwindling supplies meant the territory was fast losing its appeal. Besides, back home, Russia was continuing to expand its borders. The 1858 Treaty of Aigun saw Russia swoop up over 3 million kilometers of new land from China. This included all land north of the Amur River, which gave Russia new territory in what was formerly northeastern China. But the real motivating factor behind China wanting to offload Alaska was the Crimean War. From 1854 to 1856, Russia fought Britain and its allies in the region of what's now modern-day Ukraine. Britain, Turkey, France, and Sardinia eventually defeated Russia, preventing further Russian expansion and opening up opportunities for Turkey's Ottoman Empire. It was a crushing blow for Russia. The war had put a huge dent in the economy and left the reputation of its military in tatters. Britain and France had outmuscled Russia with superior technology such as steam-powered battleships and long-range rifles. The timing couldn't have been worse. Britain already had a strong presence in North America and was looking to colonize parts of Western Canada. Specifically, Britain had its sights on British Columbia, directly under Russian-controlled Alaska. When British Columbia became an official English colony in 1858, the alarm bells started ringing in Russia. They now had one of their arch-enemies controlling a territory right on their North American doorstep. Relations between Russia and Britain were very much acrimonious after the Crimean War. If Britain set its sights on moving into Alaska, Russia knew it would be almost impossible to defend. Their armed forces were decimated after the Crimean War. The war chest was basically empty, and there was nobody there to protect their borders. The best thing to do was to get rid of Alaska. But to whom? France was also interested in parts of North America, but was an ally of Britain, which ruled them right out. America was the obvious candidate. Both the US and Russia had agreed on several foreign policy issues, and most critically, both were hostile towards Britain. But with the American Civil War brewing, negotiations with America had been put on the back burner. So, in 1867, Alexander II approached the Prince of Liechtenstein with an unexpected offer. How would you like to buy Alaska? Prince Johann II must have been gobsmacked and thought, why us? At the time, Liechtenstein's entire army would have been lucky to have consisted of 100 soldiers. The tiny country was half the size of New York City and only beginning its path to industrialization. If Liechtenstein were to acquire Alaska, how on earth would it go about defending it from an invading army such as Britain? In short, it couldn't. The only clue as to why Russia offered Alaska to the tiny principality lies in Liechtenstein's geography. Sandwiched between Austria and Switzerland, Liechtenstein was especially close to its Austrian neighbors. The Austrian Empire was one of Europe's true superpowers in the 19th century, second only to Russia and Britain. Austria had considerable military strength, and with a population of over 32 million, ranked up there with Germany and France. In 1867, Austria joined forces with Hungary, forming the Austro-Hungarian Army. This alliance boasted over 350,000 active soldiers, which could double if conflicts ever broke out. Russia was no doubt wary of Austria, which was typical of the mid-19th century. Conflicts were breaking out everywhere, and trust was hard to come by. Still, Russia's relations with Liechtenstein were friendly enough, and the offer to Prince Johann was put on the table. As to how serious the offer was, it's hard to say. Was Russia always intending to sell Alaska to the US and was simply toying with Liechtenstein? Or were the Russians genuinely desperate to get rid of their territory and running out of suitable buyers? Whatever their actual intentions, Liechtenstein's Prince Johann was most likely surprised and maybe even slightly flattered at the Alaskan offer. One thing was obvious though, the sparsely populated Liechtenstein was never going to seriously consider buying such a massive chunk of land over 7,000 kilometers away. The proposal was politely turned down, and Russia turned its attention to the only real potential buyer, America. The US pounced on the offer. The Manifest Destiny ideology was going in full swing, and America was keen to expand on its Pacific territories. The Pacific coast states of California and Oregon had just been established, and adding Alaska was a no-brainer. America stood to get its hands on a wealth of untapped natural resources. Alaska's landmass of over 1.7 million square kilometers was more than double the size of France. From a strategic point of view, it also made sense to start accumulating territories in the West. Britain had colonized British Columbia and Vancouver Island in Canada, and relations between the two were still a long way from being cordial. By gaining Alaska, America could then gain a strong foothold in the Pacific trade with East Asia. And so it came to be. America agreed to Russia's terms, and on October 18, 1867, Alaska became an official American territory. We can only wonder what might have happened had Liechtenstein snapped up Alaska. With such a small population, it's difficult to imagine them really having sufficient human resources to set up any kind of effective colonies in Alaska. And then there's the question of whether anyone in Liechtenstein would actually have wanted to uproot from a peaceful existence in Europe to try their luck in a foreign and hostile environment on the other side of the world. Highly unlikely. Liechtenstein would also have no chance of protecting Alaska if a foreign aggressor such as Britain suddenly took a shine to the vast territory. At the time, Britain was hell-bent on expanding its empire across the globe, from Africa to southern Asia and into Canada. Britain was flexing its military muscle wherever it saw fit. Had Britain then said, "Thank you very much," and taken Alaska from Liechtenstein, we'd be left with another hypothetical here. So, would Britain have held on to Alaska, or would it have been too much trouble and Alaska would then have been handed over or sold to the US, or maybe Canada? Regardless, as it turns out, America did quite well from the deal. Alaska has huge reserves of oil, gas, and timber, which are crucial to the American economy. Alaska also offers several strategic advantages. It's geographically in the center of the Northern Hemisphere, putting an anchorage in close proximity to major world cities such as Beijing, Moscow, and Tokyo. Alaska also provides America with an Arctic territory. As the Arctic ice continues to melt, new and faster trade routes are becoming a reality. Shipping goods between Asia and Europe can be 10 days faster via the Arctic Ocean than traditional routes, at the low cost of our widowed planet. So, that's a thank you to Tsar Alexander II. And as for Liechtenstein, well, Europe's fourth smallest country ended up just fine without Alaska. It boasts one of the world's highest GDP per capita at well over $100,000. Liechtenstein thrives on a robust manufacturing sector that exports high-demand and high-cost products such as precision tools, pharmaceuticals, and medical equipment. Citizens of this industrious and peaceful country can expect to live well past 80, up there with other long-living nations like Japan and Switzerland. While it was nice of Russia to make an offer, Liechtenstein is doing quite well without Alaska on its plate. But thanks for asking.